Some of my listeners are a little bit puzzled. Currently, I understand in England the offer to nurses is 4%, but a deal was done with barristers at 15%. How come they get the cash and nurses don't, Minister?
Well, I think, barristers haven't, if you spoke to barristers, they haven't had a pay rise for a number of years.
And the same would be said of nurses, of course, Minister.
Well, no, that's not true. Last year, when no one got a pay rise, nurses got 3%, and actually the 4.5% that's the average pay rise for nurses, new student nurses or new qualified nurses got nearly 9%. So it's not quite as
but the barristers get 15.
That.
It is a surprise, isn't it? Who's more important in life, do you imagine, a barrister or a nurse?
Well, it depends if you're a criminal facing prosecution. Your barrister's probably pretty important to you. All three nations are in negotiations with the RCN.
But have you put
stages.
a revised pay offer to them?
No, we use the independent pay review body process.
Okay.
So we have been very clear.
I go back to my original point. Why can't you do for nurses in England a revised pay offer which may cause them to call off strike action?
Well, we've been very clear that we have an independent pay review process. We have to respect that. We don't always abide by their decision, but we have in the last year. That gave nurses a 4.5% pay rise, and it went up to nearly 9% for newly qualified nurses. And we want to start process from April.
My question, Mary Caulfield, was the Welsh Government's offered an extra 3% on top of the 4.5% already tabled. Why can't you do that for nurses in England?
Because we have to pay for it.
England's nurses being offered less than those in Scotland and Wales.
They're not being offered less than in Scotland, so Scotland's at the negotiating stage.
Why are they being offered less than those in Wales?
Well, we have to take a responsible view about everyone's
So are they being irresponsible in Wales?
I'm not going to comment on the negotiations in Wales. They haven't been agreed by RCN members. It's been put to the members, and we'll know the result of that in the forthcoming days. Members may well reject that in Wales, as they did with an 8% pay rise in Scotland. What I can say is that we've got a responsibility to all taxpayers in this country, and we've got a range of public sector workers asking for pay increases.
You can't retain nurses, you can't recruit new nurses. Tories did actually stop enough nurses being trained for a number of years, so you kind of brought the problem on yourself. If you need to pay more to get enough nurses to do the job so that its working conditions are good enough that the rest of them will stay, that's a small price to pay for people getting adequate health care in a first world country, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. We have recruited over an additional 10,000 new nurses, and we returned the bursary, which was scrapped previously, which helps students.
Who was it scrapped by?
Through their training.
Who was it scrapped by?
Well,
Scrapped by your government.
I trained on a bursary. But absolutely, it's been returned. But we've also introduced the nurse apprenticeship scheme, which is earning while you're learning. And so many people don't realise that that is back. And actually, student nurses can have their training paid for and be in work and learn on the job. And we've introduced that over the last few years. And actually, it's really successful. To reassure patients in England, where we're responsible for healthcare, it is less than half of trusts where nurses are going out on strike. So the vast majority of patients will still get their procedures and appointments. But absolutely, we are concerned, and I'm slightly disappointed. I'm an RCN member myself, that in Scotland the reason they've suspended strike action is on negotiations of the forthcoming year's pay awards. That's exactly what we're wanting to discuss and negotiate in England. And I would just ask Pat Cullen, who I respect very much, to offer the same courtesy to England as the RCN are doing to Scotland. We would welcome the RCN in particular coming around the table. They have withdrawn from the independent pay review body process, which is a real shame.
It's not independent, that's why.
Well, I would disagree, because there's been times where we've not accepted the independent pay review body's recommendations in years gone by, and so if it wasn't independent, that would not be the case. We did accept it in full this year, and the unions did as well, and that's our method of getting a pay settlement for the forthcoming year.
You yourself are a nurse. As Pat Cullen says, you are one of their members. I mean, a headline like that is so frustrating for people, and I'm sure nurses and ambulance workers to read, because when the money is needed, somehow they find it. But right in this scenario, as Susanna's saying, you won't offer any more increase to the nurses, which might alleviate the strikes today.
So we want to have discussions about pay, absolutely, but it has to be about from April, which is only a few weeks away.
Not like we're talking about railway drivers here. The public support is huge for nurses, for teachers, and I think you're talking about being the custodians of the public purse, and yet the public actually understand why they are asking for what they're asking.
Well, absolutely. But my disappointment, I guess, with the RCN this morning is that in Scotland they've called off the strikes because they're prepared to talk about this year's pay rise, which starts from April. We are in exactly the same boat. I know how difficult it is to live on a nurse's wage, but also with ongoing strikes.
No, that's not my question, though, with respect. Do you think that NHS workers, by going on strike, are putting lives at risk?
There's a risk to patients the longer strikes go on. So if you're cancelled for your operation the first time, there's probably a minimal risk. If that's cancelled time and time again because of ongoing strikes, then patients become more poorly and there's always a risk. And with ambulance strikes, you know, if someone's not got to, if they're having a heart attack or a stroke, you know, that does increase someone's risk the longer that response time is.